Good morning, everyone. We'll just wait a minute or so while people join the Zoom webinar room, and we'll get started in a minute or so. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Health Services Research Association of Australia and New Zealand's monthly webinar. We've got a terrific speaker and topic for you today. But before we get underway, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name's Rachel Morton. I'm a Professor of Health Economics based at the University of Sydney and the President of HSRAANZ, the association. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and seas of Australia. For me, I'm zooming in from Alexandria in Sydney, and that's the home of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations people who are joining us today. One piece of housekeeping and one announcement. For this webinar, the way it will work is that our speaker will talk for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have questions and answers. And if you could please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, and not use the chat function, because that can be a little bit distracting for speakers. The Q&A function will then post all of your questions, and I'll then ask those questions to our speaker. The other announcement is a reminder that the Health Services Research Conference is on this year. It'll be held actually at the University of Sydney from the 30th of November to the 2nd of December. And you do have a couple of weeks left to submit your abstracts. The deadline is the 6th of June. So please consider that and pop it in your diaries. Okay, so our speaker today is Associate Professor Craig Gedye. He's a medical oncologist and cancer researcher, and he works for people with melanoma, brain, prostate, bladder and kidney cancers at the Calvary Mater Newcastle, and is Associate Director of the HMRI Clinical Trials Unit. Craig's research focuses on complexity and heterogeneity in cancer. Why are cancers different between people? Why are cancer cells different to each other? What does this mean for each person's treatment? This challenging problem spans projects across the research spectrum, from patient experience through clinical trials, translational biomarkers, and questions in basic science. Craig is privileged to lead several cancer research projects for New South Wales Regional Health Partners, the ANZUP and Cogno Cancer Trials Groups, and he chairs the ANZUP Renal Cancer Subcommittee. Craig contributes to multiple other scientific trials committees and ethics committees. His presentation today is about reimagining clinical research. And as a truly innovative thinker, these ideas are very applicable to health services research. Thank you very much, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Thanks so much for the invitation. When we were developing this series, said, "Oh, how does this influence health services research?" And I said, "Well, I don't know really, because I don't know if I'm doing health services research. I'm just trying to solve problems in cancer, and then trying to figure out how to do that, because often we don't have the methods or the budget or the situation." So I've spent my research career really being a methodologist, trying to ask questions that I hope are important, but then figuring out that I don't even know how to answer them or use what methods. But let's talk about some of those methods today. So reimagining clinical research, perhaps a grandiose title, but here's some of the mistakes I've made and some of the solutions that have come out of it, and let's talk about those. So first off, my disclosures. So this is for Nadine Hillich. She'll like this one. So I have a lot of interaction with industry, but I've been mentored to be quite particular about how that plays out. So I don't ever accept an ad board or speaker fee or honorarium. It goes to a third party. It's often ends up, not always, but often. And if there's travel support as part of what I do, if there's travel support for some of the work that I do, that is in lieu of what I'm entitled to under the New South Wales award. So the taxpayer pays less, so that's good. Research grant support's gone to institutions, and I haven't attracted any salary related to that. And as we said, there was a number of roles. And yeah, I'm originally from New Zealand. You can't tell by the accent. So let me start by thanking a lot of people the work I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to talk about some examples from the work here at the Calvary Mater. One of the clinical trials that I thought things have been really exciting, which is a piece of work with Cogno and the CTC, the work we're doing at HMRI, and a new project that's in the process of getting ready to launch with the Regional Health Partners, which is one of the Australian Health Research Translation Centres. So my thanks to everybody on the slide and the broader teams that we're working with as part of them. It's been really instructive and a great privilege to work with these people to try and solve these problems and try and do research better. So let me start with a story. So I did a fellowship overseas in it was partly in clinical trials, partly in basic research. But I was doing a clinical fellowship in melanoma, and I'm going to tell you a story of a patient whose first name starts with the letter D. So D was a young lady, and hopefully still is a young lady, because I left that country and come back to Australia. But she had metastatic melanoma, and she'd had many treatments on experiments, and this isn't a long time ago. But she'd had the cancer grow back into a really awkward position that it was starting to invade into her heart. And she had surgery, and she had all sorts of problems. But then she had a recurrence at the site, and we really needed something special to help her. And one of the things that I really noticed about Dee was she was always really on edge in clinics, and it's not just because I'm a horrible doctor and a really nasty person. It was just that she was much more on edge than normal. And sort of after I got to know her a little while, it turned out that she was always watching the clock, because if she was having a treatment with us on a clinical trial and she didn't get to the treatment centre in time, then if she didn't get out of the treatment centre on time, she would miss the train. And if she missed the train, then she would have to pay her babysitter more money, because she was a single mum, and she lived out in the distant suburbs of the town we were working in. And if she had to pay the babysitter more, then she would have to work an extra shift on the weekends in her job to pay for the babysitter. So it was just she was under enormous stress and pressure, and suffering many of the problems that the healthcare systems are not necessarily solving to the best of their abilities. So we were in a really sort of dark place, but we started a clinical trial drug in the winter, and it was a drug whose code name is MK3475. And some of you might twig to what the name of that drug is as we go along. So she started on MK3475 as a phase 1 study, and she started in the early winter, and she carried on treatment during the winter, and then she continued treatment in the winter, which is what always happens in Canada. There's 4 seasons, 3 of them are winter. And she was continuing on treatment and through into the spring and into the summer, and it's like, okay, this is pretty good. She's been on treatment for some time now. And then one day she came in and was having a scan, and that was her scan. That was what a scan showed. And in fact, there was no cancer left on the scans. And so I was thrilled. I wound myself up to walk into the room and tell her this incredible and exciting news. And of course, the obvious thing happened is that the nurse had already told her. So Dee's response was great. When can I get my infusion and get moving? So a powerful story for me in terms of the benefits of research, but the huge unmet needs that we have in healthcare is that we potentially saved this young woman's life or extended it substantially with a revolutionary treatment. MK3475, it's called Keytruda, or pembrolizumab. It's one of the top cancer drugs now in the world. But the other key parts of her story were just as important to her. When how can I get the treatment? Can I get it close to home? Do I have to take a train 90 minutes into town to get that treatment? How is that gonna? How am I going to get back to my life and not be a patient and be a person? So very revealing. But this is what we want for all clinical trials and all clinical research, that it gives that ray of hope, that real opportunity to people. So let me just talk briefly about some of the challenges that we face during clinical research. And as I said, my job seems to just be to make mistakes and then try and dig myself out of them. So the real challenge, for clinical trials is, what are they for? We can certainly say that they're for thinking about patient benefit or improving the cost effectiveness of treatment. It can be for inventing new treatments or new devices, new drugs. They're also about profit, and there's it's very reasonable for them to be about profit if their commercial entities are involved. But it's sometimes you start to wonder whether or not profit is starting to take over as the major reason that the research is being done. And it's clear that we need more research. So when we look at our quality of evidence, most of our patients are quoting us Facebook, but Facebook is probably pretty low on that pyramid. We really want high quality clinical research and high quality research that gives us really clear guidance on how to look after people. And we desperately need that, because when you actually stop and take stock of what we know and what we know about healthcare, and it's actually really hard to find this. This is several years of me ferreting away trying to find pieces of clinical practice guidelines, really. When you actually dig into clinical practice guidelines, we most often don't know what we're doing. I mean, oncology is the worst. Hey, we're the worst. But perhaps only 15% of the time have we got really high level evidence for the research for the treatment that we offer, and then the rest of it is lower level evidence, level B evidence, but the majority of it is and I'm going to be deliberately pejorative here. It's old white male dudes in ivory towers telling everybody with the loudest voice, "Oh, this is my experience. This is what I think we should do." That's not good enough for patients. Patients deserve science. They deserve answers that are based on clear evidence, not just the loudest person's opinion. And so we've got a really big opportunity to do better clinical research to improve that. So let's just look at two perspectives with cancer trials. And again, I can't possibly make a comment on health service research, and let me talk from what I have been doing, which is cancer clinical trials. And in some respects, there's nothing wrong with them. There's been a huge uptick in the number of agents that are available. Their use in utilization in healthcare is enormous. Their profits for pharma are fabulous, to the point where oncology drugs now absolutely dominate pharma portfolios. So this is data that looks at the oncology versus everything else that's being sold from pharmaceutical companies. So it's absolutely surged and gone bananas in the last 10 years. And that's partly why the pharmaceutical industry in terms of all kinds of industries is such a profitable industry. So much better than trying to build houses or sell electricity or dig coal out of the ground. Much more opportunity for profit. But on the other side of the coin, there's a lot wrong with cancer clinical trials, and part of that is that trial participation is heavily biased and skewed. So even in the best of situations, only 10% of people that you might come through your clinic will actually ever get to a clinical trial, because they might not be discussed with them, they might not be offered, they might not be eligible, and that gets worse if you have any comorbidities. The cost is phenomenal. So commercial studies are in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to run, usually in the tens to 20s to 30s of millions of dollars. So you're talking you know, 50 to 100K per patient for these studies. And so if we're going to try and do that from the patient's perspective, how the heck are we going to do research that when that's the cost, you know, that we might get $50,000 for an entire project, not per patient. The complexity of trials is going up and up and up and up. So this is David Dilts came out and talked to the Katz Institute, you know, 4, 6, 7 years ago now. Amazing dinner talk where he just talked about the process of clinical trials. And this is a process map, and every line and every tick there is a stop and a start in a clinical trial process through the three organisations, the sponsor, the coordinating centre, and the site to undertake a trial. No wonder we have trouble with trials. They're incredibly complicated. The pharma trials that we see, so each one of those is a company, and you see that they're testing their old drug against a new drug. They do loops. They never compare across between products. So they're really turned into sort of marketing exercises, and that's no more exemplified than when you actually look at what is reported from trials. And so, although we register trials prospectively and say this is what we're going to test and this is our statistical plan, rather when they get reported, negative outcomes get somewhat skewed into positive outcomes, or a side analysis gets promoted, or a subgroup, or a retrospective hypothesis. So it doesn't matter whether your trial works or not, you always find something to speak about in marketing. And you know, it gets to the nitty gritty is that some of it, there's some questions about whether or not there's anything effective at all. So just to press on that point, this was a manuscript that actually looked at a bunch of FDA approvals over a period of time, I think 2006 to 2012, it's 36 FDA approvals. And sorry, I've got a little bit of scramble on my slides here because I've moved from one computer system to another. But these were all registered on surrogate endpoints, PFS. But when you go back and look for overall survival, you know, half of them are clearly don't improve overall survival. Another 2/6 of that are unknown, that the overall survival was never reported or never examined, and it's only in a minority of cases, maybe 5 or 6 out of 36 was there a true overall survival advantage. But I put an asterisk there because the median benefit was 2 to 3 months. So you know, we've got an enormous amount of work, enormous amount of activity, enormous amount of things going on, but you know, is there any real benefit? What about patients? So that's on the side of the pharma side of it, and it's also hard for us in thinking about trying to build an academic career within this space, because medical research is hard. I don't know if you noticed that, it's quite difficult. Funding is parlous, particularly in banana republics like Australia, where we invest in other things except health and medical research. That can lead to temptations. I don't know, he's not seemed like a bad guy when I knew him, but his temptation has to have led him into a situation where he's fabricating data. It's awful. His career's over, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's been done that may be, you know, highly questionable. So, but there's this enormous pressure on us to deliver, to survive in this field. And you know, if you look at survival, this is another manuscript I found absolutely fascinating, that the half-life of survival as a scientist in a variety of cohorts, this is astronomy, ecology, robotics, but I'm sure health and medical research is the same. The half-life of a career is plunging. So people come in and they immediately go spin out the door. Very few people can now build a career in scientific research, medical research. And if you haven't read science fictions by Stuart Ritchie, it's a really nice summary of all of the challenges that science faces, and in particular our terrible, you know, our human nature, that we want a higher impact factor to support our ability to pay a mortgage. So you know, there's lots of challenges on the commercial side, on our side. There's questions of scientific integrity and research integrity, and you know, John Oniadis has taken a bit of a hit in the COVID wars. He's come under some scrutiny, but I think we're all familiar with his very famous essay and its follow-up greatest hits, why most clinical research is not useful. And so this is the dreary situation we find ourselves in. So thank you for coming to my TED talk, and I'm so sorry you're now depressed. Oh, well, let's talk about some solutions. Oh, you know, and let's talk about some of the mistakes I've stumbled across and then trying to figure out how to solve them. So let's reimagine. Let's think about what our goals are. Let's focus on our goals. For those in New Zealand, this is AFL, which is actually a pretty good game. And this is a player who's kicking his 1,000th goal in the game. So it's pretty impressive. So maybe our goals are to help people, help patients. I know it's crazy. You know, it should be about H-index or shareholder value, but maybe it's about patients as well. So if it's about patients, then maybe we'll find our life easier if we think about doing research that helps patients. So this is one of my favorites. This is a really great piece of research that is so simple. Instead of taking a anti-cancer tablet 2 hours before breakfast in a large handful of tablets, you take a quarter of the dose, so 1 tablet instead of 4, a quarter of the dose with your breakfast, and you get the same kind of result because there's a food effect. You know, so the company recommends obviously taking 4 tablets, but you can get away with 1, and this would save Australia $90 million a year if we implemented it widely. Great piece of research, really small clinical trial, but great piece of research. This is another one that's really inspired me, and this comes back to the idea of cancer heterogeneity and complexity. This is something that I've been fascinated by, but this is the idea of, this graph represents time on treatment on the x-axis, and the y-axis is a normalized biomarker telling you how much of the cancer is inside the patient's body. And the yellow lines there are the lines of the treatment. The times that you're taking the treatment. So in this case, you take the treatment for long enough to knock the biomarker down, but then deliberately stop it and let the cancer proliferate and grow again before restarting the treatment. And you can see there's a lot of gaps of time on treatment. But if you actually compare that against usual therapy, this so-called adaptive dosing might actually improve the duration of control of the cancer. So it's not about patient experience. It's actually, that's your secondary gain potentially. It's actually about actually making a drug work longer because you're not selecting genetic clones out of the cancer. You're not causing the cancer to mutate and evolve over time. You're actually helping the cancer let itself reset each time, and they're spreading the benefit out over time. So at the Mater, we've done a follow-up trial to that. It's a very small feasibility pilot. We completed recruitment last week. It's funded by ANZUP's Below the Belt Pedalthon funding agency. So thank you very much to ANZUP. And thank you very much to the Medical Oncology Research Team, because their infrastructure and the incredible culture that they have here in terms of research enabled me to bring a small amount of money in to do an investigator-led study, which is an incredible privilege. But to think about going back to the patients, one of the things that we thought was going to be really important is the idea of starting treatment. When I described it to colleagues, was that they thought I was nuts. But instead, we thought we better figure out how to explain this to patients. So we did a patient video, and I'm very happy to share that. In fact, I do them now for all the trials, just to describe the study. And one of our endpoints in the study is, do patients actually, do people who we give a consent form to actually take part in the study? And I think we've only had like 1 person turn us down and 1 person got too sick to take part. So explaining the strategy to patients and giving them a more detailed description, I think has helped people along the way. And this was, as you can see, a video that's made by sitting at home and playing on PowerPoint and then recording it, and it didn't cost any money. So this is the kind of stuff that it can actually, I hope, actually improve our ability to do research, because we're actually taking an opportunity to help engage with people better. So that's focusing on the patients. What about focusing on the teams? These boys. So sorry again, we've got a little bit of scramble on the slides because I've had to move between the university computer and the hospital computer, because the hospital computer's got a network that isn't affected by the rain. When it rains in Newcastle, the university network starts to fail. And so there's been some scramble on the slides. So this is about a clinical trial in glioblastoma. So the first thing to say is that glioblastoma clinical trials are hard. It's rare cancer. All of the interventions we've tested in recent times have failed. So people are pretty miserable about the situation. it's hard to know what's going on. There's pseudo-progression and pseudo-response. So the scans don't tell you. You really have to wait for overall survival. And to the point where the publication of trials in brain cancer really lags. So the percentage of trials that actually complete and then publish is actually really, really poor. So it's a really difficult cancer to do studies in. So thanks to the Australian Brain Cancer Mission and Mark Hughes Foundation, Kerry's Beanie's Brain Cancer, and Cancer Australia, we got an MRFF funding for Cogno in collaboration with the Clinical Trial Centre at the University of Sydney to develop the MAGMA study. So MAGMA is a multi-arm study. It started off quite simply as a partial factorial design with optional randomization, but we're going to migrate it to a formal MAMS design. And we're testing two randomizations in people with brain cancer. First, we offer them chemotherapy before their radiation starts, so that's not usual. And the second is to decide whether to stop the chemotherapy at 6 months or continue on. So those two implementable ideas are early chemotherapy and prolonged chemotherapy. And there's evidence for both of those potentially as ideas, but no one's done a proper randomized study to look at those questions. So simple ideas that are about patient benefit. We go back to our patient engagement. So this time there's not only video, there's a QR code, there's a brochure with infographics, there's infographics throughout the patient information gets in. And again, the feedback I'm getting is that this is really helping sites to engage and enlist patients and at the same time as being very, very humble about the fact that it's not a whiz-bang new drug or new trial, new treatment. It's just modifying standard of care. The next innovation is really inspiring for me is to see so many parts of science and healthcare and clinical trials doing this. Is that if you collaborate and share that credit, build that trust, and build that teamwork to start with, you can do amazing things like describe the microwave background of the universe, accurately map the entire planet. You can get surgical trainees and medical students to work together and do amazing clinical trials with no money. I hate it when surgeons teach us how to do stuff. I always want to be smarter than surgeons, but the incredible work that these consortium collaborations are doing. So we've developed a consortium document and a consortium offer to share academic credit as long as people fulfill the criteria of authorship. And we still have to attend to that, but we want to make it open to people to share the credit. And then we also want to respect the sites. We want to respect the sites who are doing the study. So for this randomized phase 3 study, those are the inclusion criteria. The standard of care. And there's also parsimonious data and trial activities. Clinical trial often have lots and lots of boxes and lots of crosses. But what we've got there is a really limited amount of activity, and therefore the trial payment actually matches the site costs, as opposed to most studies where the sites are actually subsidizing the coordinating center by an enormous amount of money. So by actually asking for what we're paying for, I hope we're doing better. And I think we're doing all right. We've got really humbling engagement. We've got funding for I think 30 sites. I think we put on number 24 this morning. So Riverina coming on this morning. So we've got sites all across the country. We'd love someone in Canberra. We'd love someone in Canberra, please. That's the only major centre we haven't got. And it's doing pretty well. The recruitment's, you'll often see the recruitment lagging after the project. We've actually consistently beat recruitment, and we're due to close ahead of time, and that's all while COVID has been disrupting all of our workflows. So that's the I've talked about the MARTA project. I talked about the Cogno CTC project. In the last couple of years, we've also got an opportunity to work back with HMRI, and yes, that's the getting up from the car park into HMRI at the moment because we're having a big renovation. No, there's no mud. But starting clinical trials and starting a clinical trials portfolio and a program in your team is actually really hard. And all of you and me I and you have all been helped by other people. Other people have helped us up. And the idea came at HMRI to think about, well, can we do this? Can we actually implement a way of helping other people to start their clinical research careers? And so HMRI invested in a clinical trials unit a couple of years ago. It's a very small team of us. HMRI is a medical research institute that is really focused on geography because it's a partnership of our community, the University of Newcastle and the Hunter New England LHD. And our purpose is very simple. We need to improve the health and well-being of our communities. So we've got a number of really strong assets and goals, but we've got real strengths in discovery science in our local community and our partners, the university and the LHD. We've got an incredibly effective and efficient health research ecosystem, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We needed to increase research that translates into health solutions, and that's where we came in, because there was clarity that people couldn't start their careers in clinical trials. So that was our goal. So what we've essentially done is try to provide absence-needed trial services for our partners. So in panel A, there is the idealized way that a clinical trial works. So a coordinating center or a sponsor or a pharma company interacts with a investigator, and the investigator, of course, knows everything about running clinical trials and is an absolute guru in GCP and the National Clinical Trials Governance Framework. It knows everything about ECRFs and so forth, and they supervise the coordinators, and the coordinators are just peons who just do the work. And in the real world, clinical investigators have really important roles in clinical trials, but they do not have the expertise. I do not have the expertise to run a clinical trial, and that's where we absolutely rely on a much more even partnership with our clinical trial coordinators and our clinical trial professionals in our systems. And so finding a way of building that portfolio of work and funding that enables you to keep these wonderful people on in their roles and to keep that partnership going is really hard. So in oncology at the moment, there's lots of pharma money, so take that, and then it helps us subsidize the cooperative studies, and then sometimes we get to do our investigator work, and that keeps the funds ticking over. But for many people who don't have that injection of cash, how are they going to get started? And so that was the premise: is that can we become an as-needed trial service? Can we give you what you need? Can we do the bits that you need to do your clinical trials? And so it's been a really, we actually took stock yesterday, and it's been a really amazing 3 years as we got started, because we went out and said, look, we don't even know what the market wants locally, but here are all sorts of activities that might be useful for our partners, both in the hospital and the university. And you know what? People have wanted all sorts of different things, including clinical trial development services, which has been really, really exciting to help people develop. Sometimes that hasn't gone anywhere. Sometimes people have got to the point of getting to funding opportunities, and we're hoping to get people across the line. But there's all sorts of things that people need, whether those are site level or coordination level, governance, even something as stupid as getting invoicing done. Getting people to make sure that they get paid. So many little activities that inhibit and stop people from doing parts of the research. And so it's been amazing to work with this team. And again, we're very small, but we've got some incredibly experienced clinical trial coordinators and now a program manager who've been able to start pulling all this all together. And so now we've got to go for our next step and next innovation, and how do we grow ourselves sustainably, but how do we actually increase and accelerate the opportunities for our local partners. So finally, and I think I'm doing okay for time, finally, I just want to talk about a project that's still in development, but getting to the point of launching very soon. And this has been a really exciting and challenging project, and the team I'm working on it with is amazing to be able to try and pull this together, because this is trying to pull a lot of these threads together. It's a lot of these threads at the same time. So let's go. The project's with the New South Wales Regional Health Partners. So The Regional Health Partners is one of the Australian Health Translation Research Centres. So there's a variety of them around. There's Monash Health Partners, Diamantina, Sydney Health Partners, Sphere. So there's a lot of them that are attached to Sandstone universities. We're one of the only ones that's specifically in regional. There's another one that's focused on Indigenous health. That's in the it's based in Alice Springs, but we're one that's actually a very broad partnership across 8 or 9 different partners across a very broad footprint. So we're talking down to the Hawkesbury River up to the Queensland border. So a very broad footprint and a diverse number of organisations. And the focus of the project is a project for Cancer Institute New South Wales. And one of the goals is to improve, it's not, they don't want to be a bit around the bush. One of the goals is to improve patient outcomes. So translatable research that improves patient outcomes, no pressure, all the way to the end goal. And that's really important because if you look at this is actually data from the Australian Cancer Atlas. And you might notice that all of that land that I've outlined is some shade of orange or yellow or even brown. And it's not the blue of Sydney and Brisbane. It's not the better than average survival from cancer of urban centres. It's a worse than average survival. Let's look at that in more detail. So this is the ROBCO report. This is data from the latest ROBCO report from the Cancer Institute. And there's overall 5-year overall survival from cancer, from invasive cancers, not skin cancer, in regional LHDs, in regional rural LHDs in New South Wales, and urban Sydney LHDs. And you can see that there's an 8% decrease, relative 8% decrease in overall survival between regional and urban sites. And we saw that the rural health inquiry was released last Friday. And the executive summary is just our usual life. It's damning in terms of the amount of resources that are available to people to offer healthcare in regional or rural sites and the outcomes for these patients. So it's a really difficult situation. But despite these challenges, and despite the fact that staffing is 30% less, and that service delivery, sorry, this one's got a bit scrambled. This is some data from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. It shows that services, Medicare and PBS, Medicare services throughout healthcare are about 20% lower in rural LHDs compared to urban LHDs. So I'm sorry, they're scrambled. So 30% less staffing, 20% less services, but 8% less survival. So people in these regions are doing something really amazing with the resources they got. They're being inventive. They're inventing ways of giving the best care they possibly can. And that's really encouraging. What can we do with those strengths to build on that? So this is the grant, the unwieldy name of the grant. And those, I said, are the goals. No pressure. Strengthen capacity, research capacity, foster a collaborative culture of research, and improve outcomes. Yep, no problem. But here's the premise. Here's the way we think we're going to do it. We've got these amazing regional healthcare professionals who are showing their inventiveness and innovation already. We want to help them by bringing some assets together that will enable research. So using administrative data and a data commons to be able to help them. And again, I don't need to tell you guys about administrative data. You know it much better than me. To provide support to those researchers and through a consortium and then additional supports to see if we can work together on projects. To focus on pragmatic patient-centered research, because that's the research that our institutions want. They do not want stuff that improves our index or improves shareholder value. They want research that improves healthcare outcomes in their regions. And so that's the goal, is better healthcare. So the approach we've taken, it's got many ways of describing this, and I keep sort of innovating the way I'm describing it, but it really fits in nicely to the open science framework. And many of you know this very well, that it's a way of making sure that the sources of the way we do things, our methodologies, the data, the access to that data, but within the 5 safes, of access to health data, is open as possible, so that we are encouraging and enabling of our colleagues to take part. And the payoffs for open science are efficiency and benefits, both global, local, and economic. So Lofty goals again, but that's, I think, a reasonable framework to talk to for some of these ideas. So instead of thinking about, and I've got only a couple more slides, Rachel. So the Open Cancer Research Project is starting to think about how we might do research in our areas. And on the left is what the tasks you might have to perform to get through to a research project. But on the right, and I'm not going to go through them, but I'll touch on the highlights. We try to provide support or ideas or innovations at each level to enable that research to happen. So thinking about all of the steps, or all of those hundreds of steps that you need, what can we put in place that will enable that? Research consortium, again, as I described before, master protocols and then sub-protocols to enable getting the research, getting ethics done so that people don't have to trudge through that process. And then recruiting within that data commons, within that data registry, and with ongoing momentum, not having to start from scratch. And then professional services for data management and data analysis. So again, you guys don't need me to tell you that administrative data can be useful. It doesn't tell the whole picture. It doesn't give you granular detail, but it can tell you the story of someone's life. And if we're randomizing people to different interventions, then the outcomes that these things measure are important. Overall survival, time out of hospital, when do I need to get a prescription for painkillers? The outcomes and endpoints that are important to patients. I'll gloss over this. This is again some of the research infrastructure that we're putting together, because we're still in the startup and development phase for this. But this is the goal: is to try and reach out to everybody who's coming to our services with cancer, inform and engage them through the strategies that you've seen, consent and enlist them to basic information, and then get their permission for data linkage, but also then working with health pathology to be in a position to access their historical biospecimens. And that'll enable us to do retrospective research and biospecimen-driven research. But if we get permission to recontact them, then we may be able to enroll them in pragmatic prospective trials, behavioural or health service research, and biospecimen research. Because what we really want to do is we want to show that vinegar cures cervical cancer. Because it does. And I remember being in the audience when this research project was presented at ASCO many years ago, that this incredibly pragmatic piece of research that used health visitors and direct visual observation of the cervix with vinegar was shown to dramatically reduce mortality. This is the kind of research we need to do. This is the kind of research that pragmatic research can do in low and middle income countries. Let's think about how we can do that in our space as well. So I showed you this slide before, and again, I would just like to thank all of the people who've been on these crazy journeys with me, and are still on these journeys with me as we work on these incredibly exciting ways of solving these problems. But thank you. I'd love to hear how you solve these problems as well. I don't think I can speak to health service research. I'd really love to learn from you guys as well. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Craig. Very stimulating, very interesting presentation. I think a lot of synergies with the challenges that health services researchers face as well. So I'll just invite people to type their questions into the Q&A. And while you're doing that, Craig, I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask you. So the first one was really around the use of repurposing medicines that are already registered, and I guess repurposing them in the way that you might change the timing or the dose or the delivery, and in a way that's quite similar to a lot of health services research that's about delivery. It's something that's already done. It might be standard care, or it might be standard for some groups. Do you see that? Because particularly your example of the stop and start, there's probably quite obvious cost savings in terms of the total cost of the drug if you're not using it, every day. Do you see that NHMRC or MRFF might be keen on funding these types of comparative effectiveness trials or comparative effectiveness studies? Because there's not only potentially a patient benefit with reduced toxicity, and a patient benefit or a hypothesis in terms of better, survival or progression-free survival, but also lower costs. So do you think this sort of model of the intervention is doing less versus standard care is likely to be attractive? And do you think we'd see specific schemes or targeted calls for this type of comparative research?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rachel. I would say from your lips to God's ears. This is the kind of thing that we really do need to help people understand. I guess it depends on the local climate. I know that this kind of research has been funded in Switzerland, where a colleague deliberately went back with a bone strengthening agent called denosumab and said to the insurer, do we need to give this every month, or can we give this every 3 months? And said, this is what we're going to save during the trial, and this is what you will save if the trial is positive, and got funding on that respect. I think we're in such a parlous state within HMRC. Clinical trial funding. Rachel, you've been in this game a long time. You should get every one of the grants that goes up, and you probably get about 10% of them, and the rest of us get 3 to 5% of them. We just the funding is ridiculous. I certainly would like to see if there's appetite at the Department of Health in Canberra for these kinds of studies. But it's not just about drugs. I mean, one of the other ideas we've got is there's a group of patients with cancer that we particularly fail, and that's people who have a carcinoma or an unknown primary site. If you have a cancer that it comes up in your lung, you find it on a chest X-ray, you go to the lung clinic, you go to the respiratory clinic, and they do a bronchoscopy. If you have a breast mass, you go to the breast clinic. If you have a spot in your brain, you actually do better because you go to the neurosurgeons. But if you come up with cancer that's behind your belly or in the middle of your chest or in your liver, no one wants to touch it because it might not be my problem. So I'm not going to waste my time getting involved. So it's a group of patients that everybody plays kickball with, and so instead if we had a I've got one proposal, which is to see if we can rebadge them as VIPs, very important patients, or vulnerable and important patients, and see if we can actually create a clinic that specifically is delivered for that. But then how do we resource that? That's the key. And does that change? Does that resourcing then change their outcome of those patients? And I'm hopeful that the Open Cancer Research Project will give the kind of data outputs that would enable us to follow those kinds of interventions in practice. So
it sounds it sounds very relevant to cancer system organisation, and certainly probably to a lot of people on this call. Okay, yeah, thank you for that. We think quite a lot about de-escalation, de-implementation interventions, and I mean, obviously it can have a role in terms of reducing low-value care, but certainly investigating it in the first place. I'll ask one more question, and then we've got a couple coming through the Q&A now. When your slides about sharing credit, I think, are really encouraging to see for somebody who's often, perhaps a chief investigator of a clinical trial. How might you, or how do you share credit with consumer partners or consumers as investigators or co-designers in your research?
And thanks, and that speaks to the question that's also on the chat there. So, it's a key point for all of this that we go back and design from the beginning with people. It's not just about making sure that we're addressing questions that are important for patient outcomes. It's the conduct of the study is valuable as well. So that sometimes is haphazard, and we know for funding rounds it's truly lip service. We know that people pay lip service to that as they go for funding. But I think that the real opportunity, if we can get the cost of research down, then we can be in a position where the consumers can actually drive some of the questions. Because if we've got really cheap cheap barrier. You know, if the cost of running a study is really cheap, then we can do a bloody sausage sizzle and raise money that way to be able to do those questions, and that really puts power back to the consumers. We're going to absolutely, with the regional health partners, dip into their consumer advisory group, and you know, with studies, with Cogno, with ANZ, we have those. The consumer advisory panels are a key part of those organisations. I see that credit is, you know, academic credit is something you can spread widely. And I mean, look at the COVID surge. I cut this slide out just for brevity. But look at the COVID surge manuscript in the Lancet that had 15,024 authors.
Yeah.
You know,
a record, definitely.
Yeah. So why shouldn't consumers who are taking an active role in development of a project not also take part? And the real barrier is not the barrier, but the informational step is the Journal of Medical Editors criteria for authorship, and we need to be able to show that we are attaining that for people. But you know, here we are online giving a webinar. We can edit documents together online. We can show that people have looked at a document. We can show that they've edited a document. We can show that they've approved a document. Those are the criteria that define authorship. So we can, if we can show that, there's no reason why consumers, trial coordinators, nurses, you know, pharmacists at hospitals, you know, all the people who make the clinical trial possible, there's no reason why they shouldn't take part if that's important to them.
Yeah. Okay, terrific, thank you. I will just go back to the question in the Q&A. So it's from Kathy Dempsey. Do you have any plans for consumer involvement to be part of the routine steps or pathway that you've outlined? Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Craig, about that?
As I said, the Regional Health Partners project, the Open Cancer Research Project, is still in development, and but a stakeholder engagement plan is a key part of that. The way that we hope to engage people is to be able to have their permission to report back to them about research that's ongoing, but also to make sure that as each piece of work is proposed, as each group of researchers in the consortium proposes a new piece of research, that they engage with local and consortium-wide consumer representation. And again, Regional Health Partners has got its own consumers, but we've got our own consumers often at each site that we want to reflect not only the question of the design, but the needs for that. And so one of the interesting things I think we're planning for the New South Wales Cancer Conference this year. So the New South Wales Cancer Conference is on the 13th to 15th of September. So put in your abstracts and get your registrations there. So this is a growth out of the Sydney Cancer Conference. So it's now incorporating the Regional Health Partners. But we'll have a workshop there where we actually try and look at to see. We won't have time to do a full James Lind Alliance and look at the priority setting partnerships. But we want to see what research is important for people in rural and regional settings. Right. Make sure we're addressing things that are important. The cancer is not necessarily different if you're living in Toowoomba or Toorak, but the challenges that you face are obviously going to be different. Yeah,
and then that brings me to my next question, actually. Your slides around the importance of the local context, and you showed the graph showing poorer, survival outcomes for people in the Hunter and regional areas up to the border compared with Brisbane and Sydney. A lot of health services researchers are really concerned about and work in the area of trying to reduce health inequities. So I was wondering to what extent you think access to care, in cancer services contributes to that, or are there other factors? And what sort of, health equity lens do you apply to the type of research you do?
I don't know, Rachel, it was a delight to be invited to speak for your group, but I can't pretend to be a health service researcher. I just try and solve problems. The equity is what it is. This is the situation we're in, and for all sorts of societal issues that may be addressed on the 21st of May, for example, for all sorts of societal issues. People in regional and rural areas have low socioeconomic status, lower access to education. They have worse risk factors for many diseases. They have higher rates of smoking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of socioeconomic and demographic features that put the challenge on. And in our space as well, you know, First Nations people as well have particular challenges. So there's that, but then there's also the issue of staffing. And I mean, we've got 15. We actually don't know what our staffing looks like. So you know, there was some really interesting data last year that said we actually don't know what the health service workforce actually is in Australia. So I can't put my hand on my heart and tell you that we have 50% of the medical oncologists that you have in Sydney, but I can count the medical oncologists in the Hunter New England LHD on. I only have to take off one sock to count the number of medical oncologists in our space, and that's 1.5 per 100,000, and in New South Wales overall it's 3.1, and in Victoria it's 4.0. So you know, I would argue to you that we have less staff, and less staff is because we have less funding. So there are some really big questions there. So rather than look at the glass half empty, though, I want to point out again that the outcomes for people are not nearly as bad as the staffing and the service provision imagine that they might be. These people, my colleagues here in the regional and rural areas, are doing something amazing. Let's figure out what they're doing. Let's learn from them, and let's enable them to do other pieces of research that are also amazing as well.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Craig. We might bring the questions to an end there. If anyone has other questions, they can send them through, and we might try and pose them later. This session's been recorded, and so everyone who's registered will be able to view the recording at a later date, or revisit it if they wish. Thanks very much, Craig. It's been really, really interesting and really stimulating. And I think, you know, we look forward to, you know, some work. Certainly, you know, a lot of us do work with your colleagues at HMRI, and, you know, thinking about some of those areas that have real applicability for health services research. So thanks very much for your time, and a terrific talk.
Thanks for the invitation.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Sarah, for the IT and support. I'm not sure if you wanted to put up a final slide, just reminding people of the conference. But once again, the Health Services Research Association's conference will be on in Sydney this year, the 30th of November to the 2nd of December, and abstracts close on the 6th of June. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a good day.